Hey everyone, it's Peter Kerr from Daydream Nation, Pulse 94.7 FM. I have a special guest to the show today. I have Reed Little from The Contrarians. How's it going, Reed?
Going fantastic, Peter. Thank you for inviting me. How are things there?
Not too bad, not too bad. It's starting to warm up a little bit, but looking forward to summer just around the corner.
Oh my gosh, it's 107 Fahrenheit here today. Hold on just a second. I have to do this. Phone. Convert 107 degrees Fahrenheit to Celsius. That's 41.6 degrees Celsius.
Wow, there you go. Oh, well, the world is warming up. The world is warming up. All right, today we are going to talk about rock and roll concert cliches. So I thought I'd get Reed on the show to talk about those moments in a concert that frustrate the hell out of us. Cliches that are just being repeated again and again and again and just completely tick us off. So it could be something in the song set. It could be a choice of song. It could be a performance. It's a rock and roll cliche, and cliches are things that are used again and again because they simply work. But from a creativity perspective, not so good. So, Reed, over to you. What is your first rock and roll concert cliche that you want to talk and have a little bit of a rant about?
Okay, well, you're going to have to bear with me on this one. So a lot of these are kind of specific to heavy metal shows. And the two bands that I have seen live most in my life, well, one of them no longer for an obvious reason, is going to be Dio or Dio adjacent bands and Iron Maiden. I have seen a lot of both of them live both times, and Dio/Black Sabbath and Iron Maiden, they have very specific things that they do in concert, but it spills over to general concepts. And the first one that I'm going to talk about, and this is really going to sound, this is hashtag first world problems. So I recognize that a live song is a different thing than a song on an album, right? You're going to get different sonics. You're going to get different arrangements sometimes, different presentation of the material, all necessary when you change medium from recording to live. But there is a sweet spot for the change. You can change it too much, and both Sabbath and Dio and Iron Maiden change things too much for my liking, or you can change it not enough, and we'll get to that too. And you end up with a song that's not in the sweet spot. And for anybody who is wondering what the sweet spot is, the perfect examples are the live version of Kiss's Rock and Roll All Night or Cheap Trick's I Want You to Want Me from Live at Budokan. If you go back and listen to the album versions of those songs, they're pretty weak. But if you listen to the live versions, even though they're similar, they're faster, they're punchier, they're more aggressive, they just sound better. And it's even on radio now, it's the live versions, at least in America, it's the live versions you hear. You almost never hear the album versions. The live versions have become the default versions of the songs. But you can go too far in that direction. And Dio was notorious for doing this. He was the medley guy. And I can't stand a medley, right?
Yes.
So, like he would start Rock and Roll Children, and then in the middle of Rock and Roll Children, he would stop and do Long Live Rock and Roll for like a minute, and then he would stop and do a minute of Man on the Silver Mountain, and then he would stop and go back to do Rock and Roll Children. And yes. I'm like, you know what? I love Long Live Rock and Roll, and I love Man on the Silver Mountain. I even enjoy Rock and Roll Children. But don't break it up. Play all three songs. Don't give me the altered, shortened version of it. All that makes me do is go, I want to hear the rest of the song. Why am I only hearing a piece of this song?
Absolutely. And you pick up on so the cliche here folks, is melodies in heavy metal shows. And I can agree with you. I've seen a lot of hard rock heavy metal shows where they bring melodies. I know Scorpions do it. If they want to cover their early 70s material, they do it in a melody, and it shortchanges the long-standing fans that want to hear these songs in their totality, not a melody. So it's sort of, it shortchanges the audience, and it is very much a cliche. A lot of bands do that.
Right. And I have a corollary to that, but why don't you give us your first cliche first, and then we can talk about my corollary afterwards.
Well, my cliche is solos. So I'm not a big fan of the extended solo. And I commonly talk about solos in rock concerts as bourbon time. That's really where you elbow your mate and say, let's go to the bar and pick a bourbon. And hopefully by the time that we come back to our seats, the solo is over. There's been a few shows where I've actually come back and the solo is still going, unfortunately. The drum solo. Let's talk about the drum solo. The drum solo is the most cliched part of a rock concert. The shapes of the drummer, where he puts the stick up in the air and then he goes 1, 2, 3, and it gets faster and faster. And it's just basically him doing a little bit of a workout. There are very few drum solos that engage with me. You have to be like a Neil Peart or somebody at that level that will get my attention, and I'll sit in my seat. Otherwise, I'm off at the bar and I'm going to get a bourbon and come back, and hopefully it's over. But I just think the drum solo is just indulgent, and I can't stand it. It breaks up the momentum of the song, of the whole show. So you might have a killer song set, Reed, and song sets are very important in concerts about, the light and shade, building up the crescendo. And you put a drum solo, it's sort of like grinds things to a halt. Maybe it's put there deliberately to give the people a rest so they can have the option to go get a bourbon at the bar and come back. What's your opinions on drum solos?
Don't care for them. But I'm not a drummer or necessarily a fan of drummers. I love guitar solos if they're relatively short. I've heard a lot of bum guitar solos too. But now this is an interesting thing. Peter and I are about the same age. I'm just going to generalize and guess that most people who might check out Rock Daydream Nation are going to be kind of similar, say within 10 years of our age. This problem gets worse as the artists get older, because this might have deserved its separate entry, but I'm going to introduce the idea now. Nobody ever leaves the road, right? So you still have bands from the 60s touring, from the 70s touring, from the 80s touring. And maybe when they were in their 20s, they could do a 90-minute show without breaking a sweat. But now that these guys are in their 60s, 70s, 80s, they need a break. And it's one thing if you're seeing a 90-minute or 2-hour concert, I have no problem with the people on stage, and it's brutal on stage. I'm in Texas, and if you go to an outdoor concert in August, on stage, it's 15 degrees warmer than in the audience. So those people are dying. And the idea that they need to take a break and get some water, I'm totally behind that. But I've seen, like towards the end of Dio's life, when he's doing 40-minute short sets, he would have a drum solo, a guitar solo, and a bass solo in that set. And I was like, dude, if you can't get through a short set without taking 5-minute pauses for instrumental breaks, it's time to consider that maybe move to a lesser touring schedule, right? But yeah, I think old artists especially need those breaks. The worst I ever saw was B.B. King. And don't get me wrong, I have nothing against B.B. King as a musician. But when I saw him, it was just a couple of years before he died. And the whole concert, he would play for 30 to 45 seconds, and then he would talk. And he would talk for 5 or 6 minutes, and then he would play a very short amount of time, and then he would talk. And I was like, oh my gosh, this is sad.
Well, that dives into another rant that I'll talk about, which is stage patter, but we'll talk about that deeper as we go into the show. But still on the topic of solos, I understand that solos can be designed as a breather. You know, I mean, the inverse of the drum solo is the acoustic bit. So where you've got the singer and the guitarist do a little bit of an acoustic set in the front of the stage. They sit on stools and do unplugged versions of their songs. That gives the drummer a rest. Because, you know, if you don't have the acoustic set, the poor drummer, who may be a heritage band, he's plugging away the whole, you know, playing a 2-hour show. So you've got to give him a bit of a breather. Let's do the acoustic set. So a lot of these cliches may be driven by their age, their medical condition, giving their vocals a rest. I have a theory that a lot of the guitar solos, and this is another thing, we'll talk about guitar solos. I think a guitar solo should not go more than 5 minutes. Any more than 5 minutes is sheer indulgence, and it becomes just ridiculous. Like I'm a big fan of Whitesnake. I'm a Whitesnake tragic, and the last couple of times I've seen Whitesnake, they have what they call a guitar duel, which has two guitarists doing dueling solos. It goes for bloody 15 minutes. It's ridiculous. And I've seen Whitesnake in a support slot. So the support slot is only about 60 minutes or 50 minutes top. And out of that 50 minutes top, they're doing a 10 to 12 minute guitar solo. So you're a fan, you want to see Whitesnake, you want to see him in the support. Time is money, time is valuable, and they're wasting it with a guitar solo. I think that's indulgence. And let's face it, guitar solos have been a cliche of heavy metal and hard rock. And, you know, in some instances, that's why punk came about, because they just got rid of the guitar solo, where they had snappy 3-minute rock songs and just let's get on with the business. But what's your views on guitar solos in shows? Do you agree that's a cliche?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I mean, I agree. It's all about length of time, right? Because I love a good guitar solo in a song, but inside a song, a guitar solo is typically 12, 16, maybe 24 bars. You're talking about a very short stretch of time. And the art of the guitar solo then is to make a statement in a short period of time. Once you stretch that period of time out and they're just throwing every lick that they can think in, it's really not the same thing. And even George Lynch of Dokken, I'm a huge fan of George Lynch. I've seen him play, because he plays the Dallas Guitar Festival almost every year. So I've seen him play dozens of times. But even he says, you know, maybe Hendrix on acid, don't do drugs, kids, but maybe Hendrix on acid could be entertaining for 10 or 15 minutes. But most guys just playing, you know, up there blowing licks for 15 minutes. It's like, whatever, I'll go do something else.
It sounds like scales, doesn't it? It's a lot of it's just scale work, just doing runs and scales. And, you know, you're not going to come out of that concert thinking, oh, wow, that guitar solo was great. Is that going to stick in your noggin? No, it's going to be the songs. You're not going to remember the solo. You're going to remember, yes, there was a solo, but there's nothing that's going to stick in the memory, is there?
And we're past the age where people can do something like technique wise that's so amazing that you're like, oh, that was the most incredible thing I've ever seen.
Yeah. But the thing the thing with Hendrix that made it maybe a little bit beyond a cliche was the showmanship aspect. He'd put lighter fluid on the guitar. He would play the guitar behind his head. He would play the guitar with his tongue. Blackmore's the same. He's a dangerous guitar player. I call dangerous where it's not straightforward. He's going to go in a different direction, and you're going to watch the show and you don't know which way he's going to go. That's interesting. That's an interesting solo. But when you've got guitarists doing widdly guitar licks and solo, you know, guitar runs, that's when it becomes a cliche. Sorry, Reed.
No, I completely agree. Because the best guitar solos are, this is a controversial opinion, and I'm not saying solos inside songs, although probably also that, are composed. So if you've got a guy who's got a 5-minute slot and he composes a song, so it's got a beginning, a middle, and an end. It's got a melody, it's got, you know, some riffs and some motifs and a through line, so that it's just a song that doesn't happen to have lyrics. That can be very entertaining. But if it's a guy just showing off his technique for 5 minutes, I'm pretty much done after the first minute. I recently did a show on the Contrarians where I talked about Alan Holdsworth. If anybody, you know, every guitar player worships Alan Holdsworth because his technique was so amazing. Alan Holdsworth is one of the few guitarists, or one of the few concerts I ever walked out of. After half an hour of watching the guy play, I was just done. He's a jazz fusion player.
Yep.
He doesn't sing. He doesn't play rhythm. He famous. He's like, I don't play rhythm. He's a soloist. So watching him do nothing but comp the occasional scale and then solo time, and he would go for 10 or 12 minutes. I said half an hour of that. I was like, I've had all of the Alan Holdsworth I can take, and I just left.
Yeah. You know, another cliche with solos, and I'll bring drums in it, is how they interact with the audience. They do a little pattern, and then they put a hand motion to the crowd, and the crowd goes,
right.
Yeah. Or, you know, that's very much a cliche, how the soloist interacts with the audience. I've never seen anything that's out of the box that just doesn't go anything more than a cliche. Would you agree?
I certainly would, but you know, and certainly everybody in the audience is going to have their opinions on which of these things absolutely make the concert experience for them, and they don't consider them bad at all. And I have been in so many concerts where they're like, song, everyone on the left, everyone to the right, everyone in the cheap seats.
Yes.
But for every person who's going, oh, come on, can we just get back to the music? There is somebody, possibly drunk, but somebody just having the time of their life going, boo!
Yeah.
So, you know, I mean, it is definitely a cliche, and it annoys me, but, you know, I am going to acknowledge that some people absolutely love that. Maybe those people don't go to as many concerts as I was going to.
Well,
that's a possibility.
That's what it may come down to, because you and I are concert veterans, and I'm just taking myself back to my first heavy metal show. So my first real heavy metal show was probably Dio in 1986, came to Australia. And when I'm thinking about the pacing, the song set, the solos, it had all the cliches that you would expect in a heavy metal concert, all the drama. It's only because I was starting to get a lot of concerts under my belt, you know, seeing all the big acts come through town, like your Aerosmiths, your Motley Crues, your Kiss, and you think, okay, these bands are doing the same shtick. They're doing exactly the same song set. They're doing the same pacing. They're putting the guitar solos. There's no differentiation. It's only when I started to look at, you know, go into other genres. And this is, look, I'm a mad heavy metal fan. I love it, but just a lot of it just sounds the same in respect of how the concerts pan out. And, you know, when you have these concerts under your belt, you realize it's cliche, and maybe cliches are used because it gets the result, it gets the engagement. But for me, you know, I like to be challenged.
Sure. Okay.
Let's talk stage patter. Let's talk stage patter.
Oh my gosh.
That's another big rant of mine. And I think it affects all artists. So I'll give you an example, stage patter that goes outside heavy metal. Elvis. I love Elvis. I'm a bit of a late bloomer when it comes to Elvis's work. Went to Gracelands, got touched by the hand of Elvis. I love his stuff. I've bought a couple of Elvis live albums, and he's the king of drawing out stage patter. It must have been quite frustrating for the audience, or maybe they were besottled. It's hard to tell. But Elvis, when he was in Vegas, he used to do 3 shows or 2 shows. One, you know, like it might be at 7 and he'd do one at 11. I've got an album of Elvis at Las Vegas in one of the casinos, and there is so much stage patter that they're about to start up a song, and then you go, whoa, let's stop this, and then he'll do this off the wall, you know, rant about Gatorade. So he'd be talking, you know, Gatorade is the best drink that you should ever drink. Do you like it, boys? You like Gatorade? Seriously, I've got a live album, and he stops Hound Dog in the middle of the song, and he talks about Gatorade. I don't know if the drugs were, you know, affecting him, but seriously, there is some stage patter that just breaks the momentum of the show, and you know, we just want more music. We want to hear you sing, you know, stop the stage patter. What's your views on
Sure.
a stage patter? Like,
I like minimal stage patter, which is it's kind of funny. So one of my first musical loves was Kiss. And of course, every Kiss fan in the 70s fell in love with Alive and Alive 2. I mean, those albums only came out 2 years apart. Maybe 3. I think it's 2 though. And Paul Stanley is the king of stage patter. In fact, there's a website. I was trying to remember what it was called. It's something like People Can I Get This Off My Chest, where it records page after page after page of people transcribing Paul Stanley's stage patter.
and it's very
it's
cliche.
just hilarious.
It's cliche,
Yes.
isn't it? You know,
But he at least is spontaneous in his cliche. Now, on the other end, I saw ZZ Top in a freak coincidence. I saw ZZ Top 3 times in the same year in 3 different locations. Once in Texas, once in Oklahoma, once in Louisiana. The stage patter was identical to the word at each of those 3 shows. And I thought, this is surreal. There's so little originality in this show that they're not even bothering to have new stage banter? That's weird.
I saw ZZ Top in 1988. They only played for 60 minutes, and this is stunning. It was 60 to 70 minutes, and for a major arena act to play 70 minutes, that was just, I felt really shortchanged. And the stage patter was absolutely zero. It was just playing the songs. There was no interaction. To be quite frank, I enjoyed Rose Tattoo more. But don't get me wrong, I've seen ZZ Top about 30 years later in a club, and they were sensational. They were engaged, and it was a completely different experience. But maybe they were burned out, because this was after Eliminator and Afterburner, which was just phenomenal. But getting back onto cliches, there's so many cliches in stage patter. It's quite frustrating. Hello, Cleveland, you know, out of Spinal Tap. Hello, Sydney. And it gets quite comical where some of the performers read are so burned out, they say the wrong city on the wrong night. And that's happened, hasn't it? You know, hello, Brisbane, constantly. And they're actually in Melbourne.
Well, in the Dallas-Fort Worth area especially, the venues are usually not in Dallas itself or Fort Worth itself. Now, the big arenas are, but a lot of the smaller places are in suburbs. They're in Irving, they're in Arlington, they're in, you know, Bedford or someplace else. And a lot of times the artist has no idea where they are. So they'll just say Dallas. And if you're not from the Dallas-Fort Worth area, that's cool. But if you're from like Arlington, people are like, hello, Dallas. People are like, we're not in Dallas.
Yeah.
But you can sympathize with the guys who they go to sleep in the dark and wake up in the dark and go up on stage and have no idea where they are.
Absolutely. Another cliche is when they pit off the hometown against a rival town. So like in Melbourne, they go, oh, you are so much better than Sydney. And, you know, when the artist is in Sydney, it was, oh, we were in Melbourne last night, but you guys are so much better. And it gets the crowd going. And I'm thinking, oh, okay, bit of a cliche, you know, where they're winning the audience over. But I've got a mathematical equation. I think more stage patter, maybe with the front man, is equivalent to their diminished vocal prowess. Case in point, you have artists like David Coverdale. David Coverdale, one of my favorite vocalists. His vocal chops are diminishing because it's an aging process. So he has to use different sort of mechanisms to engage the audience, and that is increased stage patter. He is a showman. there's no doubt he's got the X factor. He's charismatic. And I think that he does a lot of stage patter because he's giving his voice, he's doing everything he can to get that voice out and preserve it for the songs. And that's why there's increased stage patter. So what's your take on that?
Well, I mean, obviously, again, and I'm sorry, I've got another computer monitor up. It keeps darkening on me, and it's changing my light, and it's driving me nuts. So I have to shake my mouse occasionally to keep it from doing that, and it probably looks very rude. Again, as we get older, as the artists get older, yeah, you do kind of appreciate what they have to do to take care of themselves. But my flip side to that is always the apparently unaging Glenn Hughes, because that man, he's over 70 and he still sings like a teenager. And I saw him live a few years ago. I'm seeing him live at the end of the month for the 50th anniversary of Burn. I'm very excited about that. But last time I saw him, he did Mistreated in concert. Now, Dio wouldn't do Mistreated live. If you get Rainbow on stage, it's got an instrumental version of Mistreated. Well, Glenn Hughes does Mistreated with the full vocals in the middle of his show. And if you think about how many high screams there are in that song, now you could sing it as a baritone, just as a blues. We were talking about blues earlier. Mistreated's a blues. But Glenn doesn't. He sings it at the top of his range, just belting it out. And then he goes on and does another 45 minutes of songs after that. That's amazing.
Rainbow, Dio did actually sing Mistreated live on stage.
Did he? I could have sworn that was a instrumental one.
Yeah. Anyway. But look, I think that, the whole thing about stage patter is that, there are very few and far between singers or front people that come up with something that's, you listen to it in the stage, in concert and think, oh, that's witty. That's interesting. I've never heard that before. They're well-worn type of phrases and comments because they're effective and they engage the audience. But from a creativity perspective, maybe not so. I'm not sure.
Right.
Another thing I want to talk to you about is song sets. So Is it a cliche that you save the hits for last?
I mean, yes. Usually they're going to hit their one. If they've got a biggest hit, that's going to be their encore. Maybe not their very, very last song, but at least in the last bit, because that way people will stay. If you play your biggest hit as the first song, people will get up and leave, right? Because there's probably someone in your audience who's only there to hear that one song. It's
daring though. I mean, if you like, concerts aren't cheap these days, Reed. If they've paid $100 to $200 to see that person, and they play the hits now and then they leave, maybe you're not a real fan. What are you doing paying $200 to go to a concert and sit in and just, that's the whole purpose of you going to the concert. But it is a bit of a cliche that, in regards to a song set, to put all your hits like right at the back of the song set. Isn't it more daring to put it at the start?
Well, I would go a step further and say that the cliche now, and of course touring now is different than it was back in the day. Of course, back in the day, it was different. Although song sets have always emphasized the more popular songs, pretty much every concert now is a greatest hits package. And one of the things I really admire about Iron Maiden is that they'll go out and do new songs. And some people get really angry about that because they're like, no, I want to hear Iron Maiden and I want to hear Hallowed Be Thy Name, and that's it. But they go out and they play new songs. Whereas last time I saw Def Leppard, it was basically the Def Leppard's Greatest Hits CD just performed live and sounding 98% like it does on the CD. And I think some of that has to do with the listening habits of modern audiences. And I will lay out a couple of my usual discussion rules. One, when we talk about human beings in general, there are no rules for individual human beings. So whatever an individual's preference is can be anything. But when you talk about groups of people, there absolutely are rules. And the other is, if you're watching Rock Daydream Nation, you are probably in the 1% of people who actually care about your music and listen to albums and listen to deep album tracks. Casual music fans are not going to be watching this sort of YouTube channel. But you can't generalize our experience to the mass audience. The mass audience is now using Spotify or Apple Music. They are listening to playlists, often put together by an algorithm. Up to 50% of Spotify is made up of algorithmically generated playlists. And they are listening to the greatest hits. They're not putting on an album and listening to it front to back. They listen to their favorite song from this album, or the biggest hit from this album, the biggest hit from that album, the biggest hit from the other album. Yeah. And if they see a band in concert, that's what they want. It's what they expect. So if you go to a band, and I remember Joe Elliott years ago saying, hey, we tried to put in, and I don't remember what the cut was, but it was off of Pyromania. And I think it was Rock Rock Till You Drop. But it was some others. He was like, we tried to open our concerts with that, and it was just nothing. Yeah. And then you go into pour some sugar on me, and everyone goes insane. So he's like, yeah, we play what people want, because it's what people want.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, you raised some interesting points, because, people of our age, they've been conditioned to the albums, the joy of putting an album on the turntable and listening it from start to finish. But in this day and age, it's all about songs. And, I guess, it's the kids of today. They like the instant hit and the, exploring artists by songs. And that's why a lot of the greatest hits albums are the biggest selling albums at the moment. The biggest selling vinyl album, for example, is Queen's Greatest Hits. It's not a Queen album. Yes. It's Queen's Greatest Hits. So people
that's
like that. That's
consistently true of legacy artists.
Yeah. But getting back to the cliche, I think it is a bit of a cliche where they put their hits at the end. It's also a cliche. And I guess this whole point of this conversation is that we're challenging cliches. Now, whether it's good or bad, but they're well-worn conventions in a concert. The encore. Now,
I was going to bring up the encore next.
Yeah, let's do the encore. Let's do the encore. Now, the encore, I've seen bands finish up. They go backstage. They don't even have time to light up a cigarette. They're back on stage within half a minute. Hey, we're back. That's not even encore. There's no time for the audience to start clapping and stomping their feet and we want the Angels or we want Akadaka back. It's just, it seems to be so well worn. Okay, we've got to give them an encore. However, there have been some artists in the past that haven't given the encore. Richie Blackmore was very famous in Rainbow, that where he wouldn't provide an encore, and the audience absolutely ripped the seats out of the concert. They were so upset. And Richie had this theory that if I felt that the audience didn't deserve an encore and I wasn't getting that energy, I'm not going to give them an encore because it's a well-worn convention. But do you agree? Is the encore a cliche?
Absolutely. The encore is, over the generations, we have trained audiences to expect an encore. I know, so I just saw the Kerr in concert this year. I shouldn't say I just saw them, but I saw them this year. And they played for 2 hours. It was a monster set, but it was basically an hour, take a break, first encore, take a break, second encore. And I'm like, well, that's not really an encore, right? An encore is the audience, or the show is over, you leave, but the audience adoration, the demand for your performance is so much that you come back onto stage and give them something else. And typically an encore would be one song or two songs as a thank you for being here. But now an encore is simply, it's part of the set. You're expected to, I've even seen opening acts do encores. You know, the guys are only going to be on stage for 45 minutes and they'll play for half an hour and go off. And then they'll come back and do their other 15 minutes. And I guess it's an ego boost maybe for them because people are like, hey, where are you going? You know,
absolutely. And that
ties, you still be playing?
And that ties into the big hits at the tail end. Sometimes, you know an encore is going to come because, oh, they haven't played this song and they haven't played that song. It's got to be in the encore. So it's a cliche. It's to be expected. But sometimes it's not necessarily warranted in the true sense of a word of an encore, especially when you've got the audience that's completely dead.
Yes. And so quick, because I Rock and Roll War Stories, right? Years and years ago, saw Tommy Shaw of Styx. Tommy Shaw had a solo career, didn't do particularly well. He had one hit song for the soundtrack of The Adventures of Remo Williams. There's a blast from the past, if you can remember that movie from the mid 80s. So he was opening for Rush on the Hold Your Fire tour. And he would go out and play, and people were standing on the floor with their backs to the stage. It must have been the most demoralizing thing. So he's up there playing, people are paying him no attention. So he'd start into a Styx song, and people would turn around and they'd rush the stage, and you could see him. He would look over at his guys and go, okay, we've got him. Now let's do another solo song, and people would turn back around. So there's what can happen if you're a little too brave and don't give people exactly what they want.
Well, yeah, tough audience, the Rush fans, I would imagine. And yeah, there are certain acts out there that to be a support band is quite perilous. You've really got to, choose your material wisely. Van Halen, Aerosmith, AC/DC are just some to come to mind,
Right.
And sometimes you have to pander to the cliches to win them over and not do anything too funky.
That's the thing. People like yourself and me who have been to a lot of concerts and are a little bit more maybe discerning as to specific elements, we're not who they're performing for, right? So the people that they're only going to go to this one concert, they've paid $200, they want to see those hits, they want to get that encore, they want that that audience participation part so that they can yell and cheer. Yeah, that's what people want from a concert, and if you don't give it to them, they get annoyed. Although I do love bands. I saw one band, Nevermore, actually I saw on a headlining tour, and they're only playing a club. I mean, it's a couple of hundred people that fit in this place. And they get to the end, and the lead singer goes, look, we're supposed to go for an encore, but the encore is like up these little stairs and back to this booth at the top, and it's can we just pretend that we did an encore and we're just going to keep playing?
I like that. Now, that's not a cliche. That's something like kind of inventive. Hey, another thing I want to throw in is the presentation of the all the mayonnaise. I'm talking about the lights, the flares. I think that's very cliched in a lot of shows where you seem, I guess a lot of 80s metal and hard rock, they were trying to outdo themselves in respect of the stage presentation, the stage sets, the lighting and the flares. Has that become a cliche? I think in a lot of aspects it has. Where you're sort of seeing a similar type of, stage set, and when the flares are going to come out and the fireworks and all that sort of stuff.
Right. So of course, now I don't know what building codes are like in Australia, but after the Great White concert, where all those people died at the club in the US, you don't see a lot of actual pyro anymore. So what you've got is simulated pyro, where it's
even in arenas, Reed?
Yes, where they've got flashing lights, but the acts that can afford them, of course, have the big LCD screens. And so they'll have lights and things and footage of the band and that sort of thing. But actual pyro is considered a liability now. Although I did just see an article about, I think it was Disturbed was doing a show and their pyro set off the sprinklers. That's pretty funny.
Dear. Oh no. Oh dear.
Um,
But
I didn't.
yeah,
Yeah.
like with the video screens, that's becoming a bit of a cliche. I've seen a lot of bands,
Yeah.
Paul McCartney, The Who, and when you're watching it, you're kind of distracted. You're not looking at the artist, but you're looking at the video montage behind.
Right.
One thing I want to tie back about this whole thing about presentation is, you know what's not a cliche, where you've got a band just coming on with minimal lighting, just playing the damn songs. Is that a cliche? I don't think it is anymore.
No, now of course you're working with a different thing here, and I'm gonna circle all the way back to the beginning when I was talking about bands that really change up their songs too much. Bands can not change their songs enough, and this is, I think, a function of age, popularity, and modern music listening habits combined with technology. And the band I was thinking of as my example is Yes. So Steve Howe plays Line 6 equipment. He plays a Line 6 Helix. And I read an article, a very in-depth article about how Steve Howe sat down with a recording engineer and his Line 6 Helix, which is a multi-guitar effect amp simulator unit, and they engineered the sounds in all of his song patches to sound exactly like the album. Now, I thought, isn't that fascinating? Go back to my example of Kiss and Cheap Trick and how the definitive versions of those two songs are the live versions because they're different. They're better than the album versions. Now, people expect to hear the album version reproduced with, fidelity. They want it to sound so much like the album that you have to have some kind of visual presentation behind you, because otherwise, why are you even there? You're listening to something, Yes is up there. Well, not anymore, but when Yes was touring, I think I saw them in 2010, 2012, something like that. And they're performing their songs exactly as on album. What's the point of going to a live show to listen to them sound like you're listening to the album at home? You have to have something going on behind the band to keep interest.
Yeah. Well, I think that sort of illustrates it's a cliche, whether it's good or bad. And it's all up to the individual person, isn't it? Who are we to judge? I mean, all the things that I've been talking about, a lot of people love, and that's fine.
Sure.
It is up to the individual. But Reid, thank you very much. I think we've covered some pretty good ground here in regards to the live concert experience. And I guess, viewers, tell us what you think are those moments in concerts that really irritate you. You can see Reid Little on The Contrarians. He's on a stack of shows. Check it out on YouTube. Wonderful community, which I'm a part of. And also this little channel. Don't forget about Rock, Daydream Nation, plenty of content. Tell us what you think about concert cliches, whether you agree, whether you disagree. Share an experience. One thing's for sure, you'll see me and Reid on a show very soon. Cheers.
Thanks, Peter.